Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tangmen based on novel. So let's start. If it was some ordinary soul emperor, he wouldn't feel comfortable facing this fiery evil tyrant's spiritual force field even if he wasn't completely suppressed. It was a pity that this fiery evil tyrant was facing Huo Yuhao, the eyes of Asura, whose spiritual power greatly exceeded his soul power, and was already at the standard of a title Doluo. The look in Huo Yuhao's eyes was very cold. His determined look didn't waver at all even against the control of this fiery, evil tyrant's spiritual force field. Since the two of you are courting death, I shall grant you your wishes. Huo Yuhao didn't bother with the devouring dragon that had unleashed its devouring heaven and earth at him. He was focused on the fiery evil tyrant instead. Suddenly, his eyes turned purplish gold. Yes, his eyes had turned a completely transparent purplish gold. Everything around them seemed to slow down, and the fiery evil tyrant's spiritual force field suddenly stopped. It was as if the space around it had been instantly locked. Spiritual shock. Huo Yuhao stood quietly in place and spoke each word with a pause in between. As he spoke, the fiery evil tyrant's eye seemed to be in a daze, whereas the devouring dragon continued to unleash its devouring heaven and earth. However, it scattered amidst the distorted air. A ring of purplish gold light started to spread from Huo Yuhao's head. More accurately speaking, it spread towards those two soul beasts in a fan shape. The air was illuminated in the same color as this purplish gold light passed. The devouring dragon that was charging in front suddenly stiffened and instantly went into a daze. The bloodthirsty and crazed look in its eyes turned still. Following this, its eyes dimmed. Its eyes, nose, mouth, and ears started to shoot out reddish-white gore. Its head didn't blow apart from the explosion, but its brain and spirit were crushed under the effects of Huo Yuhao's terrifying spiritual shock. The purplish gold light continued to spread. When it landed on the fiery evil tyrant, its eye suddenly turned purplish gold, and there was an astonished look in it. However, rings of red, green and gold light surged from its eye, trying to resist the force of Huo Yuhao's spiritual shock. Humph! Huo Yuhao snorted coldly. He immediately retracted his spiritual shock before focusing it all on the fiery evil tyrant. Suddenly, all the lights that had resisted his spiritual shock were destroyed. The fiery evil tyrant's eye started to shine brightly with a purplish gold light. In the next instant, another explosion occurred. Two black soul rings rose in succession, flashing in the air. Huo Yuhao seemed to possess some invisible suction force that guided those two soul rings towards him. Huo Yuhao shook his head scornfully and waved his right hand, dispersing these two black soul rings that most soul masters would have craved. Originally, he didn't want to kill any soul beasts. For Choa's sake, he didn't want to commit too many sins. However, those two soul beasts had attacked him with all their might immediately after they discovered him. Huo Yuhao was in sorrow and pain because of Choa's death. The moment he unleashed his abilities, he immediately killed his opponents. However, he hadn't expected his spiritual power to be so strong right now. He didn't shift from his position at all. Using only the first soul ring of his spirit eyes, he unleashed his spiritual interference domain and spiritual shock to kill those two soul beasts that were considered some of the strongest 10,000-year soul beasts in existence. What standard has my spiritual power reached? Huo Yuhao muttered to himself. He wasn't too happy right now, just because his spiritual cultivation was extremely powerful. The strength of his spiritual power had also helped to enhance his overall abilities to a standard that he wasn't clear of either. This also meant that obtaining his seventh soul ring was going to be much more difficult than expected. It was definitely not going to be easy to find a soul ring that was fit to be his seventh soul ring. His spiritual cultivation was simply too strong. If he were just finding a soul ring to become a soul sage, it wasn't going to be beneficial to his future development. Must I really make a move on a 100,000-year evil eye tyrant? However, can I fight an evil eye tyrant of that cultivation? Oh? Just as Huo Yuhao was pondering, he suddenly felt a weird trace of spiritual aura rising in front of him. After this, he instantly turned around and disappeared. This spiritual aura came from the fiery evil tyrant that he had just killed. As his figure flashed, Huo Yuhao immediately came to the position where the fiery evil tyrant was blown apart. He saw a diamond-shaped crystal entity on the ground. This crystal entity was dark red, and there were greenish flowery patterns on it. What's this? Is this the crystal core of this fiery evil tyrant? The spiritual aura that it released seems to have come from this. Don't tell me that this is its spirit. Evil Eyes belonged to the Sun-Moon continent. As a result, Shrek Academy didn't have much information on them. At most, only a few ordinary Evil Eyes with 100-year or 1,000-year cultivations were killed and recorded in the Academy. There wasn't any information on 10,000-year Evil Eye Tyrants. Huo Yuhao squatted down and picked up the crystal entity. He poured his spiritual power into it and immediately discovered that there were remnants of spiritual power in this crystal entity. He was immediately enlightened. It seemed like the spirits of Evil Eyes would be enhanced when they reached a certain cultivation before forming such a crystal. After this, the spiritual origins of these Evil Eyes would be hidden in such a crystal. Even though he had used his immense spiritual power to kill the Evil Eye Tyrant earlier, a shred of its spirit in this crystal still managed to flee. Evil Eyes indeed had specialized spiritual abilities. Even a fiery evil tyrant that wasn't pure spiritual type could escape with a shred of its spirit if it was killed. Does its escaped spirit possess any memories? Will it be able to draw the Evil Eye Tyrant King? I don't think so. As the ruler of this evil demon forest, what kind of an existence is the evil emperor? Will he personally show himself just because someone from his species was killed? If he does, he must be too bored. Furthermore, the Ice Empress and Brother Skydream once said that this Evil Eye Tyrant King should be about to face his 8th bottleneck. It's difficult to tell whether he'll be able to break through this bottleneck. If he can't, he'll die. Naturally, he wouldn't have time to be bothered with something as trivial as this. As long as the Evil Eye Tyrant King didn't appear, Huo Yuhao was confident in facing any form of crisis. Evil Eyes were adept at spiritual power, but so was he. An Evil Eye which didn't have at least 100,000-year cultivation was unlikely to pose any threat to him. As for those that had exceeded 100,000-year cultivation, Huo Yuhao was confident of escaping from them. Of course, he wouldn't just wait here foolishly. What if a 100,000-year Evil Eye really appeared? After pondering for a moment, he drifted towards the perimeter of the core region of this evil demon forest. He had a subtle feeling that the fiery evil tyrant he had just killed would bring him some trouble. This premonition was very clear and strong. It came from the skull of destiny that he had obtained from the three-eyed golden lion. When he focused his thoughts on this skull, Huo Yuhao could sense that countless threads seemed to be released from his head, and each thread seemed to be connected to a destiny that was bound to happen. They gave him clues. The blessing of destiny helped him to usher in good fortune and avoid calamities. Huo Yuhao suspected that Wang Qiu'er had predicted that he was going to be in big trouble before she went to Sunrise City to find him. By going there to find him, she was going to face a calamity because of him. However, she still proceeded without any hesitation and sacrificed herself. There was a simple reason why Huo Yuhao ran outward. This evil demon forest was the territory of the Evil Eyes. He was safer the further he was from the core region. He had to wait until the feeling that he had disappeared before he entered the core region again. As he fled, Huo Yuhao was thinking continuously. After he finished his cultivation and moved off, his mind was still filled with Wang Qiu'er and Wang Dong'er. He didn't think about the current state of his mind. However, he had calmed down after the fight just now and was temporarily free from his sorrow. It was extremely important for him to think. As he calmed down, he started to sense his current condition. He discovered that his spiritual sea had undergone a transformation. It was still a spiritual sea, but there was now an additional island in it. It was a splendid and magnificent island. This island was very large, and it was at the center of his spiritual sea. The Ice Empress, Snow Empress, and Skydream Iceworm were all on this island. There were pavilions, terraces, and courtyards on this island. It seemed like a mansion owned by a noble family. When Huo Yuhao took a closer look, he was stunned. That was because the building on this island was actually the Duke's mansion. This was a spiritual reflection. This was a spiritual reflection that had appeared in his spiritual sea after his spiritual power materialized. Spiritual reflection occurred when the most basic thing in his heart was reflected on a particular situation. Huo Yuhao had just reached this level and didn't know how to adjust his spiritual reflection yet. However, he could subtly sense that the growth of his spiritual reflection would determine the direction of his future abilities. He still had to figure everything out on his own. As he reached this level, Huo Yuhao was basically certain to become a titled Doluor, and even a transcendent Doluor in the future. Once he obtained his 7th soul ring, the restriction of ultimate ice on him would cease to exist, and his cultivation speed would increase significantly. Huo Yuhao was only 18 years old right now. With his current condition, he could have 9 rings in 10 years at most. He could become a 9-ringed titled Doluor with an ultimate martial soul. He would be extremely powerful then. Moreover, he possessed extraordinary spiritual power. Even though he possessed an ultimate ice martial soul, it still couldn't compare to his spirit eyes, which possessed great spiritual power. Chioa, what is the soul skill that you gave me when you fused with me? Everything that Wang Chioa had left for Huo Yuhao was in his body, including her soul bone and soul ring. Wang Chioa had mentioned before that she possessed the abilities of a 100,000-year soul beast even though she wasn't that old, because she was the emperor beast. She would have given Huo Yuhao 2 soul skills from her soul bone and ring. Just as Huo Yuhao was trying to sense the abilities that came with his 6th soul ring, a weird emotional undulation suddenly surfaced in his heart. They were negative emotions, filled with hatred, fury, and the urge to kill. When they first surfaced, Huo Yuhao immediately felt like he was about to go crazy. Gusts of cold were instantly released from his skull of destiny, and seeped into his spiritual sea. They quickly suppressed the manic feeling, and he also stopped moving. There was something wrong with his surroundings. The scenery was still the same, but he could clearly feel that something wasn't right. It was still the evil demon forest, but Huo Yuhao felt as if he were in another world now. It felt like he was being forced out of the normal world by some kind of weird force. This was a spiritual dreamland. A domain-type spiritual ability. Huo Yuhao was astonished. Even with his current spiritual power that was in the concrete material realm, emotions still poured into his heart, and caused him to enter some kind of spiritual dreamland. His opponent's spiritual power was undoubtedly very strong. Was he really so unfortunate? Did he really draw the evil eye Tyrant King over? If that was really the case, he was going to die without any chance. As he focused his gaze, his entire aura changed. Immense spiritual power instantly started to surge out from his body and through his head, like flowing water. The 6 soul rings of his spirit eyes revolved around his body as they shone brightly, especially the last, rose gold soul ring, which was extremely blinding. Rings of distorted light also started to spread out from Huo Yuhao's body. When the lights from his body contacted the air from the outside world, Huo Yuhao suddenly felt as if he had drawn open curtains, opened a window, and entered another world. Everything around him turned illusory, and started to ripple. After this, they changed into countless projections of strong soul beasts leaping towards him maniacally. Huo Yuhao wasn't moved, and just stood where he was. He shut his eyes and pressed his right hand against his forehead. After this, he coldly shouted, "Spiritual shock." The tone of the second word sounded gloomier and rougher. At each word, his aura soared higher. Reciting the name of his soul skill was an ability that Huo Yuhao figured out when he went into closed-door cultivation in Sunrise City. He combined the spells and incantations that Electrolux had passed to him with his soul skills, and used those incantations to enhance the strength of his soul skills. He didn't originally succeed in his research into this ability. It was only when his spiritual power achieved a qualitative increase and reached the concrete material realm that he managed to achieve his target in his first attempt at using this ability. The names of his soul skills had become incantations. Even though it was limited to his spiritual shock right now, it was still very beneficial to him. A purplish gold glow started to spread from Huo Yuhao's forehead. It looked like ripples across the pond of reality. Wherever these ripples passed, those distorted projections were all shattered like mirrors that had been smashed. Good, very good. An interesting human. No wonder you dare to step into my territory. So it turns out that you are adept at spiritual abilities. It seems like you are specially here to hunt those from my species. It's a pity that you're doomed today, even though you're a spiritual type soul master. Everything around him became normal again. Huo Yuhao used his spiritual detection to look in the direction the voice had come from. He turned around. When he saw the owner of that voice, he straightened his gaze, and his expression immediately became serious. It was an evil eye, a strange, but powerful evil eye. Just from its color, it was clear that it was much more arrogant than the fiery evil tyrant earlier. The body of this evil eye, or rather its huge eye, was silver white. Its size was even more terrifying. It was more than 3 meters across. The fiery evil tyrant earlier seemed like a little kid in front of him. Huo Yuhao was even more shocked that this evil eye had 16 drooping tentacles. The number of tentacles was also a semi-definite way of determining the strength of an evil eye. The more tentacles an evil eye had, the stronger it was. The fiery evil tyrant earlier had only had 6 tentacles, but it was already very strong offensively. If Huo Yuhao hadn't used his spiritual shock to destroy it, he would have found it very difficult to resist its specialized fire-type attack, the fiery gaze. However, this evil eye actually had 16 tentacles, and they were all silver-white, just like its body. This also meant that this evil eye only possessed one element, or possibly 2 elements. It was definitely a spiritual-type soul beast. As for whether it had a second element, Huo Yuhao couldn't tell yet. From the spiritual-type soul skill that it had unleashed earlier, it was likely to be from the same bloodline as the evil emperor. Evil eyes from this bloodline were purely of the spiritual element, and they held a very high status among evil eyes as the most noble. In addition, their abilities were extremely powerful. Huo Yuhao was in luck. 100,000 years. Is this a 100,000-year evil eye tyrant? Huo Yuhao twisted the edge of his lips. Aren't I too unbelievably fortunate? I'm getting whatever I want. It's just that I have to be able to handle this dish that's been presented to me. And it doesn't seem like it's going to be so easy. We'll only know who's dead and who's alive after fighting. While this was a crisis, it was also an opportunity. If this were a 100,000-year evil eye of a different type, Huo Yuhao might have just fled. He wasn't skilled enough to resist a 100,000-year soul beast right now. However, things were different if this evil eye was really a pure spiritual-type evil eye. Huo Yuhao's soul power couldn't compare to his opponent, but he was confident in taking on such a 100,000-year evil eye, given his spiritual cultivation. Moreover, he had even inherited Wang Qiu's Emperor Beast abilities. To a certain extent, he possessed a part of the Emperor Beast's abilities, even though he was a human. Huo Yuhao naturally wouldn't stand still and chat with such a strong opponent. As he spoke, he had already made his move. He knew the importance of seizing the opportunities presented to him. White, purple, black, 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 rose gold. 6 soul rings rose in succession. When this 100,000-year evil eye tyrant saw his rose gold soul ring, its pupil shrank slightly. Just like how humans were familiar with soul beasts, this 100,000-year evil eye tyrant naturally understood human soul masters, given its cultivation. Huo Yuhao's luck was simply too good. The fiery evil tyrant that he had killed earlier was this evil eye tyrant's concubine. The shred of spirit that the fiery evil tyrant had escaped with might not be enough to resurrect it, but it was sufficient to inform this evil eye tyrant of Huo Yuhao's location. Since his concubine had been killed, this evil eye tyrant was naturally furious. He quickly pursued Huo Yuhao, which was also the reason why Huo Yuhao felt a suppressive and ominous feeling in his heart. As his soul rings rose, Huo Yuhao's eyes brightened, and his first soul ring shone with white light. His eyes immediately turned purplish gold, and 2 streaks of materialized, purplish gold light shot out towards the evil eye tyrant. After his spiritual power experienced its qualitative increase, Huo Yuhao was able to manipulate his spiritual shock and make it domain type, or unidirectional. The 2 streaks of purplish gold light instantly shot forward several hundred meters, and landed on the evil eye tyrant. This evil eye tyrant's pupil dilated, and rings of silver light patterns started to spread outwards from its body. As a top-ranked spiritual type soul beast, it was clearly aware that a strong spiritual type soul skill couldn't be avoided, and so it didn't even bother evading. Just like Huo Yuhao was confident in his own spiritual power, it wasn't afraid of facing a soul emperor, given its cultivation. Even though it could tell that Huo Yuhao was a little weird, and he was able to break out from its spiritual control, it still didn't regard Huo Yuhao highly. The 2 streaks of purplish gold light stopped in the air as they collided with the rings of silver light patterns, immediately creating surging ripples of energy. Huo Yuhao and this evil eye tyrant were at both ends of a spiritual storm that had erupted between the 2 of them. As Huo Yuhao was the one who had started the attack, this spiritual storm was more concentrated around the evil eye tyrant. The destructiveness of this spiritual storm was different from the destructive capability of soul power. As it raged, the air between Huo Yuhao and the evil eye tyrant warped drastically, and everything seemed to turn unreal. All the plants in the region started to wither at an alarming rate. They weren't destroyed directly, but their internal structures were messed up under the effect of the clashing spiritual powers, and their biological integrity was affected. The silver undulations started to become stronger. They began to buzz, and a series of terrifying spiritual explosions occurred. Intimidating explosive forces were unleashed in random directions. The withered plants were blown apart and scattered everywhere. Huo Yuhao squirmed like a withered leaf and was flung backward as he suffered from the shockwaves of these explosions. There was no expression on his face, but a dim light flashed across his eyes. He shut his eyes as his third and fourth soul rings shone in succession. A white skeletal head appeared above the evil eye tyrant. Even with its abilities, it was still affected by Huo Yuhao's enfeeblement even as it went up against his spiritual power. The evil eye tyrant was about to charge ahead at full speed, but suddenly slowed in midair. A dim golden whirlpool appeared above its eye as it stopped completely in place. Mass enfeeblement, spiritual confusion. 2 control-type soul skills were unleashed, completely revealing Huo Yuhao's immense control abilities. Although the evil eye tyrant appeared to be a little confused, it seemed more callous and ferocious. Its aura soared as if it were confident of crushing Huo Yuhao in the next moment. The truth was that it really was that confident. While Huo Yuhao's spiritual attacks were strong, it could clearly sense that Huo Yuhao's soul power wasn't even at the level of a 7-ringed soul sage yet. Huo Yuhao was much too inferior compared to it. Even a transcendent Doluor would find it difficult to fight a 100,000-year evil eye tyrant. No soul master was willing to face the immense spiritual power and innate soul skills of this 100,000-year soul beast. Although this evil eye tyrant had only just broken through to a 100,000-year cultivation level, it possessed the purest bloodline of the evil eyes. It was also absolutely confident in its own abilities. While it was stunned that Huo Yuhao's spiritual power was in the concrete material realm, just like its, it was confident of crushing Huo Yuhao due to the huge gap between their overall abilities. 1 or 2 control-type soul skills could only temporarily restrain it. When it unleashed its full power, it was confident of easily defeating this puny human. However, it didn't know that it had made the mistake that most soul beasts made when facing human soul masters. It had underestimated its opponent. At times, a soul master's abilities couldn't be completely explained using the number of soul rings they possessed. Although this was only a rare occurrence, a soul beast would be in deep trouble if it met such a soul master. 2 control-type soul skills were used on this evil eye tyrant in succession, and the air in front of Huo Yuhao was warped and distorted. Huo Yuhao was interfering with this evil eye tyrant's spiritual senses. This time, his interference didn't cover a large area, but just a small spot in front of him. He was using it to block the evil eye tyrant's observation of him. To the evil eye tyrant, Huo Yuhao's body seemed to contort and bend. It couldn't possibly see what Huo Yuhao was doing under the effect of his mass enfeeblement and spiritual confusion. However, it wasn't worried at all. It managed to regain its movement in the next second. Furthermore, it was already prepared beforehand. While Huo Yuhao's 2 control-type soul skills had managed to take effect on it, their effects wouldn't be nearly as good in the future. Its huge figure was now flying at an extremely rapid speed, and completely unobstructed since all obstacles had been destroyed by the spiritual storm earlier. As it flew, the silver patterns around its eyes started to shine brightly. Its 16 tentacles opened wide, and every tentacle was flashing with intense silver light. All living matter, including plants, immediately met with disaster once they touched his tentacles, because his tentacles could devour spirits. Once they struck something living, they could unleash a spiritual explosion that would enter an opponent's body and destroy their spiritual world. After that, it would devour his opponent's shattered spirit devoured to nourish itself. A pure-blooded evil eye tyrant like itself didn't need to ingest any food. What it needed was pure spiritual power. Huo Yuhao looked like great nourishment to it. Right now, the look in its eye had turned from arrogance to greed. Any evil eye would be extremely delighted to see such a tonic right in front of them. A terrifying beam of silver light 3 meters wide shot out from this evil eye tyrant's eye in the next moment. Evil eye gaze. This was one of the strongest innate offensive soul skills of an evil eye tyrant, and the most frightening ability of a pure spiritual type evil eye tyrant. Its effect was similar to Huo Yuhao's spiritual shock, its strength varying depending on the abilities of the evil eye tyrant unleashing it. It was rumored that the evil emperor had used it on the god beast Di Qian once, causing Di Qian to stop moving for around 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, he could only passively take blows from the evil emperor. This memory came from Wang Qiu'er. The huge beam of silver light quickly closed on Huo Yuhao. The evil eye tyrant was deliberately merciful and didn't unleash its full strength. It was afraid that it wouldn't be able to devour Huo Yuhao's spirit if he was destroyed. However, it suddenly saw an eye open when that beam of silver light was less than a meter from Huo Yuhao. It was a vertical eye covered in rose gold sunray patterns, and it released black and white lights. Huo Yuhao's rose gold soul ring shone at the same time. Not only this, but a wheel of light suddenly shone behind Huo Yuhao. This wheel of light seemed very weird. Although it was an illusory existence formed from light, there seemed to be patterns carved onto it. It was an image of a three-eyed golden lion and a dancing golden dragon. The huge beam of silver light struck Huo Yuhao's body the moment that rose gold wheel of light appeared. An extremely weird scene appeared at the next moment. Huo Yuhao's body turned illusory, and the beam of silver light passed through his body. This beam of silver light lasted for several seconds before it disappeared. As it ranged out, a corridor several hundred meters long formed in the forest, surrounded by withered plants. Huo Yuhao's illusory figure turned real again, after this beam of silver light passed through his body. He wasn't hurt at all. One black and one white light shot out from his eye of destiny. The 100,000-year evil eye tyrant was shocked that Huo Yuhao was able to survive its evil eye gaze without being harmed at all, and was struck by these two streaks of light. It felt slightly dizzy before it returned to normal. It seemed as if nothing had happened at all. However, Huo Yuhao could see that its eye was no longer silver. It was now black and white. The world that Huo Yuhao saw was different from the world that this evil eye tyrant saw. In his eyes, he initially saw countless threads of destiny around this evil eye tyrant. However, they had been snapped at this moment. Not only this, but this evil eye tyrant was also weakening at a shocking speed. It wasn't just its soul power that was weakening, but its spiritual power, too. Huo Yuhao's eye of destiny turned back to rose gold, and a layer of distorted, rose gold ripples started to spread from Huo Yuhao's eye of destiny. When this strange layer of rose gold ripples appeared, everything around them turned rose gold, too. On close observation, even the dust drifting in the air paused as the rose gold ripples passed over it. This evil eye tyrant was extremely sensitive and felt that something was amiss. Subconsciously, it tried to use its spiritual power to unleash its soul skills. However, it discovered that it couldn't do anything, and couldn't even move its body. It was like its spiritual power had been frozen. The most terrifying thing was that it finally discovered that there was something wrong with its body. It could sense the black and white aura on it. It let out a tragic scream and struggled. It wanted to break free from the mounting fear seizing it. It managed to succeed, as the two soul skills that Huo Yuhao used on it could only hold it in place for a second each. When combined, they could still only restrain it for 3 seconds. Changing his attack, Huo Yuhao also circulated his soul power. His rose gold ripples weren't released rapidly. They only managed to reach the evil eye tyrant after the 3 seconds were over. The moment it regained control of its body, the evil eye tyrant tried to retreat without any hesitation. However, it discovered that it was moving at a pathetic speed, like its entire body had deteriorated. It was even more horror-stricken that there was an additional piece of granite on the ground right now, a piece of granite that seemed to have miraculously survived his clashes with Huo Yuhao earlier. This piece of granite wasn't very large, but it still ran into it as he tried to avoid Huo Yuhao's attack. Even though it immediately crushed the stone to pieces, its body still stopped without any control. It was also at this instant that the rose gold ripples reached its body. Its body immediately froze, and there was now another layer of rose gold on it. Huo Yuhao was adding more colors to its body as they fought, and managed to succeed in doing so each time. The rose gold ripples spread another several hundred meters before they stopped. Within this region that now spanned 500 meters in diameter, a rose gold ocean drifting in the air seemed to appear, with Huo Yuhao at its center. The sky above the evil demon forest suddenly turned gloomy. However, the dark clouds reflected golden light amidst this gloominess. Spiritual blast. Huo Yuhao shouted coldly. The rose gold ripples started to shake, but they were very gentle and didn't cause any destruction. Even the parts of the forest that were further away and affected by it didn't suffer at all. However, wrinkles started to appear on the evil eye tyrant's eye when this tremor reached it. After that, its body started to shake tremendously. A series of weird noises sounded, somewhere between popping and blowing. Holes burst open on the evil eye tyrant's body, and silver gases flowed from those wounds. It was like a huge balloon had just popped open in several places at once. All this time, the evil eye tyrant's eye was filled with disbelief. It couldn't believe that its opponent's spiritual power could hurt it even though it had a higher cultivation. This was completely unbelievable. Huo Yuhao rubbed his forehead with his hand. The sunray patterns around his eye of destiny flared with light, and a streak of rose gold light shot out. This streak of light seemed like it came from another world. It disappeared the moment it shot out from Huo Yuhao's eye of destiny. When it appeared again, it was directly in front of the evil eye tyrant. Bloody silver light splattered on the ground. The streak of rose gold light had pierced through the evil eye tyrant's eye, and only left remnants on the outside. The evil eye tyrant's body was shaking uncontrollably now. Although its silver blood stopped splattering, it was still flowing out uncontrollably from the wounds on the evil eye tyrant. Even at this stage, Huo Yuhao didn't dare to let down his guard. This was his first time facing a 100,000-year soul beast. Lights shone brightly on his back, and soul thrusters propelled him forward. In an instant, he traveled several hundred meters and arrived in front of the evil eye tyrant. The cold look in his eyes turned gentle, and they were now filled with a look of remembrance. He clenched his right fist at his waist, and all the light in heaven and earth seemed to gather towards his fist. His eyes, including his vertical eye, were shining brightly at this moment. A strong spiritual undulation caused countless thin slits to appear in the surrounding space. The fist of remembrance, a fist which contained a surging feeling of remembrance. Boom! Huo Yuhao's fist struck empty space, and a huge beam of golden light hit the evil eye tyrant's body. The countless spatial slits started to take effect on its body. They combined with Huo Yuhao's soul and spiritual power, causing another blast to occur. A huge wound more than a meter long appeared on the evil eye tyrant's eye. It had been directly pierced through. The spiritual suppression that the evil eye tyrant had unleashed around its body stopped, and its 16 tentacles all froze in midair. Huo Yuhao trembled, but he quickly managed to stabilize himself. A streak of golden light flew back from this huge wound in the evil eye tyrant's eye and landed in his hand. It was the golden dragon spear, which had belonged to Wang Chua. Immense life energy was surging towards Huo Yuhao through the spear. The part of the spear that was drawn out of the evil eye tyrant was carrying a silver glow, as it continued to draw out the life energy of the evil eye tyrant and nourish him. The color on Huo Yuhao's pale face was slowly returning to normal. However, he thought of something, and quickly took a step forward. He grabbed the spear with his left hand and waved his right hand. His dark golden terror claws appeared and clawed out at a streak of silver light that was about to rise and escape. This video will end here.